The thundering hooves of Kieran Young's stallion sent dust spiraling into the crimson sunset as he raced toward his isolated ranch. The distant silhouette of a stagecoach overturned on the horizon, pulling him faster than good sense allowed. It was October 1871, and the unforgiving terrain of the eastern Sierra Nevada foothills near Lone Pine, California, had claimed yet another victim. "Whoa, thunder," Kieran commanded, pulling back on the reins as he approached the scene. The stagecoach lay on its side, one wheel still spinning lazily. No driver in sight, no passengers moving about, only silence and the occasional creak of settling wood. Kieran dismounted swiftly, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the hard, packed earth. At 32, he had seen his share of stagecoach accidents in this treacherous country. His calloused hand rested momentarily on the pearl-handled revolver at his hip as he scanned the area for signs of bandits. "Hello," he called out, approaching cautiously. "Anyone alive in there?" A faint moan answered him from within the overturned coach. Kieran quickened his pace, dropping to his knees beside the door now facing skyward. He wrenched it open and peered inside. A woman lay crumpled against what was now the floor of the coach. Her traveling dress, once fine but now torn and dusty, was the deep blue of twilight. Her face, what he could see of it beneath a disheveled mass of auburn hair, was flushed an alarming shade of red. "Madam," Kieran reached down, gently brushing the hair from her face. Her skin burned against his fingertips. "Can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealing fever-bright hazel eyes that struggled to focus on his face. "Water," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Kieran didn't hesitate. He pulled his canteen from his saddle and returned, carefully lifting her head to help her drink. She managed only a few sips before falling back, unconscious. A quick survey of the rest of the coach revealed no other passengers. The driver and shotgun rider were nowhere to be found, either thrown clear or taken by whoever had caused this wreck. Fresh tracks in the dust suggested at least 3 riders had headed east toward the mountains. "Damn outlaws," Kieran muttered, returning his attention to the woman. He couldn't leave her here. His ranch was the closest shelter for 10 miles in any direction, and night would bring cold temperatures that would kill someone in her condition. With gentle hands, he lifted her from the wreckage. She weighed hardly anything in his arms, burning with fever yet shivering. A small leather satchel lay beside where she'd fallen. He grabbed that too. Thunder snorted nervously as Kieran approached with his burden. "Easy, boy," he soothed. "We're taking her home." It was a challenge mounting while holding her, but Kieran had spent most of his life in the saddle. Once seated, he arranged her carefully across his lap, one arm securely around her waist. Her head lolled against his chest, her breathing shallow but steady. The sun was nearly gone by the time the silhouette of his ranch house appeared on the horizon. It wasn't much a sturdy 2-room cabin with a stone chimney, a barn, corral, and a small garden plot, but it was his, built with his own hands after years of driving cattle for other men. Mrs. Peterson, the widow who came twice weekly to help with cooking and cleaning, had left hours ago. Kieran was on his own with this mysterious, fever-stricken woman. He carried her inside, laying her gently on his own bed. In the lamplight, he could see her more clearly. She was young, perhaps 25, with delicate features now twisted in discomfort. The fine quality of her traveling clothes suggested money, while the simple gold band on her left hand indicated she was married. Kieran's stomach tightened. He had no business having a married woman in his home, ill or not. But what choice did he have? He stoked the fire, filled a basin with water, and found a clean cloth. Sitting beside her on the bed, he began to bathe her face, trying to bring down the fever. "You're safe now, madam," he said softly, though he doubted she could hear him. "I'll get you through this." It was a promise he wasn't sure he could keep, but something about this woman made him determined to try. Through the long night, Kieran tended to her. He managed to get her to swallow sips of water and the willow bark tea his mother had taught him to brew for fevers. He bathed her face, neck, and arms with cool water, all while maintaining as much propriety as the situation allowed. When she thrashed and mumbled in delirium, he spoke in low, soothing tones until she quieted. As dawn approached, she seemed to settle somewhat, though the fever still burned hot. Kieran, exhausted, moved to his chair by the fire, intending to rest his eyes for just a moment. He woke with a start to sunlight streaming through the windows. The woman on his bed was watching him with clear, if confused, eyes. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice stronger than the night before. Kieran sat up straight, running a hand through his disheveled dark hair. "My ranch about 8 miles outside Lone Pine. I found you in an overturned stagecoach yesterday evening. You've been quite ill, madam, still are, by the look of you." She attempted to sit up but fell back with a grimace. "The stagecoach. I remember it lurching, men on horseback, gunshots." Her hand went to her left side, where Kieran now noticed a dark stain on her dress. "You're hurt," he said, moving quickly to her side. "It's just a graze," she said. "One of the bullets. I was lucky." Kieran's jaw tightened. "I need to tend to that wound properly. It could be why you're fevered." She looked at him, wariness in her eyes. "I don't even know your name, sir." "Kieran Young," he replied with a slight nod. "And you are—" she hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "Catherine O'Malley, Kate, usually." Kieran noticed her fingers twisting the gold band on her left hand. "Mrs. O'Malley, I've sent word to town about the stagecoach. I'm sure your husband will be—" "There is no husband," she interrupted, her voice suddenly hard. "Not anymore." She held up her left hand. "This was protection, Mr. Young. A woman traveling alone in the West invites certain attentions. The ring discourages most." Kieran absorbed this information, feeling an unexpected relief that he quickly pushed aside. "I'm sorry for presuming, Miss O'Malley." "Mrs.," she corrected. "I was married. He died 6 months ago in San Francisco, cholera." "My condolences," Kieran said quietly. "Now, about that wound. I can manage it myself if you'll provide supplies," she said firmly. Kieran recognized the pride in her eyes. "As you wish, but you'll need a change of clothes. I have some things that might work with adjustments. And I'd be grateful if you'd let me examine the wound first, to ensure it doesn't need more attention than you can give it." After a long moment, she nodded. "Very well." With as much dignity as the situation allowed, Kieran helped her sit up and provided her with a clean shirt of his to change into behind a hastily arranged blanket screen. When she was ready, he carefully cleaned and bandaged the bullet graze on her side, relieved to find it wasn't deep, but concerned by the angry red infection beginning to spread from it. "This is what's causing your fever," he said. "It needs cleaning twice daily and fresh bandages. You'll need to rest and drink plenty of water." He hesitated. "Madam, you're welcome to stay until you're well enough to travel." Kate studied him, her hazel eyes still bright with fever but sharp with intelligence. "Why would you help a stranger this way, Mr. Young?" Kieran shrugged. "Out here, we help each other. It's the only way to survive." What he didn't say was how drawn he was to her courage. Despite her fever and pain, there was a determination in her that reminded him of the wild horses he sometimes caught and tamed, spirited and proud. "Thank you," she said finally. "I don't have much money, but I can pay you. We'll worry about that later," he cut her off. "For now, you need to rest." Over the next 3 days, Kate's fever rose and fell like the tide. There were moments of lucidity when she would talk with Kieran. telling him bits and pieces of her life growing up in Boston, marrying Edward O'Malley, a shipping merchant twice her age, moving to San Francisco for his business, and then his sudden death from cholera that swept through the city. "I'm going to my cousin's ranch near Bakersfield," she explained during one of her clearer moments. "She wrote after Edward died, offering me a home. I sold everything to make the journey." "Your satchel," Kieran remembered suddenly. "I retrieved it from the coach." The relief on her face was palpable as he brought her the worn leather bag. Her hands trembled as she opened it, revealing a small bundle of letters, a daguerreotype of a smiling older couple, a few articles of clothing, and a drawstring pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. "Everything's here," she breathed. "Thank God." In her less lucid moments when the fever took hold, she sometimes called Kieran by her dead husband's name, begging forgiveness for unnamed transgressions. Other times, she spoke of a child, though she'd never mentioned one in her waking hours. On the fourth night, her fever broke. Kieran awoke from his doze in the chair to find her sitting up in bed, her hair a damp tangle around her shoulders, but her eyes clear for the first time since he'd found her. "You stayed," she said, looking at him with something like wonder. "Of course," he replied, moving to feel her forehead, cool and dry. Relief flooded through him. "The fever's broken." "Thanks to your care," she said, catching his hand as he withdrew it. "I remember. Pieces. You were always there." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, a current of understanding, of connection forged in those long nights of struggle. Kieran cleared his throat, gently reclaiming his hand. "You should eat something. Real food, now that you can keep it down." The next morning, Kate insisted on getting up. Though still weak, she was determined not to remain an invalid. Kieran found her sitting at his table, wearing his too large shirt belted at the waist with a length of rope, her auburn hair neatly braided down her back. "Mr. Young," she said as he entered with an armful of firewood, "I think it's time we discussed my situation frankly." Kieran set down the wood and dusted off his hands. "All right. I can't impose on you much longer. The stagecoach won't run again for another week, according to what you've told me. I need to earn my keep until then." "You don't need to, I do," she insisted. "I've never been comfortable with charity, and I won't start now. I can cook, clean, mend clothing." "I noticed your garden could use tending." Kieran studied her. The color had returned to her cheeks, though she was still thin from her illness. There was a stubborn set to her jaw that told him arguing would be futile. "Very well," he conceded, "but you'll rest when you need to." That wound isn't fully healed, and so they fell into an unexpected domesticity. Kate proved to be an excellent cook, transforming Kieran's simple provisions into meals that reminded him of his mother's cooking. She mended his shirts with tiny, even stitches and brought order to his modest home. For his part, Kieran found himself making excuses to return from his daily work earlier than usual. He began bringing her wildflowers he found on his rides, and took to reading aloud in the evenings from one of the few books. He owned a collection of Shakespeare's works left to him by his father. They talked about everything and nothing: his childhood in Missouri, his journey west after the war, his dreams for his small ranch. She told him more about Boston, her love of music, her sheltered upbringing as the only daughter of a banker. What she didn't speak of was her marriage, and Kieran didn't ask, though he wondered about the man who had possessed and then lost this remarkable woman. A week passed, then another. The stagecoach resumed its route, but neither of them mentioned her departure. The bullet grays healed to a thin pink line, and color bloomed in Kate's cheeks. She took to riding Thunder in the evenings, her hair streaming behind her as she galloped across the pasture. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the Sierra Nevada mountains with gold and pink, Kate turned to him. "Why haven't you ever married, Kieran?" she asked, the first time she had used his given name. He considered the question, watching an eagle circle lazily above the distant pines. "Never found the right woman, I suppose. Or maybe I was waiting until I had something worthy to offer." "This is worthy," she said, gesturing to the ranch spread before them. "You've built something beautiful here." "It's still small," he admitted. 500 acres isn't much compared to the big spreads, but it's mine, free and clear." "It's more than enough for a good life," she said quietly. Their eyes met, and Kieran felt a tightening in his chest. She looked away first, back toward the mountains. "I should leave on the next stage," she said, though her voice held no conviction. "My cousin will be wondering what's become of me." "You could write to her," Kieran suggested, his heart suddenly pounding. "Tell her you're safe but delayed." Kate's fingers twisted in her lap. Delayed for how long? The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. "As long as you want," he answered simply. That night Kieran couldn't sleep. He lay on his pallet by the fire where he had slept since giving Kate his bed and stared at the ceiling, listening to her slow, even breathing from the other room. In the weeks since he'd found her in that stagecoach, she had transformed his solitary existence. The thought of returning to it hollowed him out. At dawn, he rose and went about his chores, feeding the horses and checking the small herd of cattle in the south pasture. When he returned, Kate was standing by the corral in a dress she had fashioned from fabric Mrs. Peterson had brought from town. Her hair was loose around her shoulders, catching the morning light like burnished copper. "Good morning," she called, smiling as he approached. "Morning," he replied, suddenly awkward. "You look rested." "I've made a decision," she said, her direct gaze meeting his. "If your offer still stands, I'd like to stay. For a while longer, at least." Relief washed through him. "It stands." Later that day, Kieran rode into Lone Pine to send a telegram to Kate's cousin, explaining her delay due to illness and her safe recovery at a nearby ranch. While in town, he found himself stopping at the general store, where he purchased a length of blue ribbon that matched Kate's eyes, and after much deliberation, a small silver brooch shaped like a wildflower. That evening he presented her with the gifts, feeling more nervous than he had facing down rustlers 2 summers before. "What's this for?" she asked, running the ribbon through her fingers. "Just because," he said with a shrug. "The color reminded me of your eyes." Her smile was worth every penny he'd spent and more. She pinned the brooch to her dress immediately and wore the ribbon in her hair the next day. As spring turned to summer, they fell into a rhythm together. Kate's presence brought life to the ranch in ways Kieran hadn't anticipated. She planted flowers alongside the vegetables in the garden, hung curtains in the windows, and filled the cabin with small touches that made it feel like a home rather than merely a shelter. They were careful with each other, maintaining a proper distance despite living under the same roof. Kieran continued to sleep by the fire, and they never spoke of the growing feelings between them. But there were moments, their fingers brushing as they passed a plate at dinner, their eyes meeting across the room, that sent electricity through Kieran's veins. On a sweltering August evening, a sudden thunderstorm swept across the valley. Kieran and Kate ran to close the barn doors as the first fat raindrops fell. They reached the shelter of the barn just as the skies opened, rain drumming on the roof above them. "That was close," Kate laughed, pushing wet hair from her face. Kieran couldn't help but stare at her cheeks flushed, dress clinging to her slender frame, eyes alight with exhilaration. Without thinking, he reached out to brush a raindrop from her cheek. The touch lingered. Kate's laughter faded, her eyes darkening as they met his. The air between them seemed to crackle with the same electricity that lit up the sky outside. "Kate," he began, his voice hoarse. "Yes," she whispered, answering the question he hadn't yet asked. Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and answer all at once. The second was not. Years of solitude, of longing for something Kieran hadn't been able to name, poured into that kiss. Kate's arms wound around his neck, her body pressing against his as though seeking shelter from more than just the storm. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin." "I've wanted you to," she admitted with a small smile. "Though perhaps not when I was delirious with fever," he laughed, the sound mingling with a clap of thunder outside. "Fair point." As the rain continued to fall, they sat on a pile of hay, talking in low voices. Kate told him about her marriage arranged by her father, not unhappy but lacking in passion or deep connection. Kieran spoke of his loneliness in the years since establishing his ranch, the emptiness of his achievements without someone to share them. "I never expected to find you," he said, twining his fingers with hers. "Especially not half dead in a stagecoach." "Perhaps that was the only way you would," she teased. "I doubt our paths would have crossed otherwise." "You believe in fate, Kate O'Malley?" She considered the question seriously. "I believe in making choices that lead us where we're meant to go, and I'm beginning to believe I was meant to find my way here." The next morning, they woke to a transformed landscape. The storm had broken the summer heat, leaving behind clear skies and air that smelled of sage and wet earth. Something had broken between them as well. The careful distance they had maintained was gone, replaced by a new openness. Over breakfast, Kieran broached a subject he'd been considering for weeks. "I've been thinking about expanding the herd. There's good grazing land to the north that Hargrove is looking to sell. With more cattle, we could turn a real profit next year." Kate looked up from her coffee, noting his use of we rather than I. "That sounds promising. How much land?" "Another 300 acres. Good water access, too." "You should do it," she said decisively. "This ranch has potential, Kieran. You've laid a solid foundation." His heart swelled at her confidence in him, in what he had built. "I was hoping you'd say that, because I was also thinking." He hesitated, suddenly nervous again. "I was thinking the cabin could use an addition, another room or two." Kate set down her cup, her expression unreadable. "Were you now, and what would those rooms be for?" Kieran took a deep breath. "Well, one would be a proper bedroom for us, if you'd consider. That is, if you might want to stay permanently." "Are you asking me to marry you, Kieran Young?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the pulse fluttering at her throat. "I am," he said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "I love you, Kate. I think I've loved you since that first night, watching you fight so hard to live. You're the strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to build a life with you, right here." Tears welled in her eyes, but she was smiling. "Even though I arrived with nothing but a fever and a bullet wound, you arrived with far more than that," he corrected gently. "Courage. Determination. A heart big enough to love an ordinary rancher who had the extraordinary luck to find you." Kate rose from her chair and came around the table, kneeling beside him and taking his face in her hands. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you, Kieran Young." They were married 2 weeks later in the small white church in Lone Pine, with Mrs. Peterson and a handful of Kieran's neighbors as witnesses. Kate wore a new dress of pale blue, with Kieran's silver brooch pinned over her heart and his ribbon woven through her hair. Kieran wore his one good suit, freshly pressed, his dark hair slicked back with water. The reception was held at the ranch, where long tables had been set up under the cottonwood trees. There was dancing and laughter, and when the moon rose high above the Sierra Nevada, the newlyweds slipped away to the privacy of their home. That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their bedroom, Kate traced the lines of Kieran's face with gentle fingers. "When I left San Francisco," she said softly, "I thought my life was ending. My husband dead, my security gone. I was going to my cousins out of desperation, not hope. And now," Kieran asked, kissing her palm, "now I know it was just beginning." She settled against his chest, her heart beating in time with his. "I had to get lost to find my way home." The years that followed were good ones for the Young ranch. Kieran bought the northern acreage and expanded his herd, establishing a reputation for quality stock that brought buyers from as far as San Francisco. Kate transformed the modest cabin into a comfortable home, adding not only the bedroom Kieran had promised, but also a proper kitchen and, eventually, a nursery. Their son, Daniel, was born on a crisp autumn day in 1872, almost exactly a year after Kieran had found Kate in the overturned stagecoach. He had Kieran's dark hair and Kate's determined hazel eyes. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, Emily, whose copper curls and ready smile charmed everyone she met. The ranch flourished along with the family. Kate started a small apple orchard that produced fruit renowned throughout the valley, and she taught music to the children of neighboring ranches for extra income. Kieran's cattle business grew steadily, allowing them to hire help and expand their holdings to nearly 1,000 acres. There were hardships, of course, droughts that withered the pastures, harsh winters that claimed valuable livestock. The year Daniel fell from his pony and broke his arm so badly they feared he might lose it. But they weathered each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each trial overcome. On their 10th anniversary, Kieran surprised Kate with a trip back to the spot where he had found her all those years ago. The old stagecoach route had been replaced by a newer one that ran closer to town, and nature had reclaimed much of the area. But Kieran had marked the place in his memory. They rode out together at dawn, their children left in Mrs. Peterson's care. Kate, now an accomplished horsewoman, kept pace with Kieran easily on her mare, Starlight. When they reached the spot, they dismounted and stood in the gentle morning light. Nothing remained of the overturned coach. It had been salvaged for parts long ago, but the landscape was unchanged. The sweeping vista of the valley, the distant mountains, the endless sky. "It seems strange," Kate said, looking around, "to think that this is where our story began. With violence and illness." Kieran slipped his arm around her waist, drawing her against his side. "I prefer to think it began the moment you opened your eyes in my cabin, when you looked at me, fever and all, and asked where you were." She smiled up at him, the years having added only the faintest lines around her eyes. "You looked so worried, and so handsome, even with your hair standing up like you'd been running your hands through it all night." "I had been," he admitted with a chuckle. "I was terrified you wouldn't make it. And now look at us." She gestured to the horses, to their sturdy clothes, to the gold bands they both wore. A decade later, with a ranch 3 times the size, 2 beautiful children, and enough memories to fill a book. "Speaking of which," Kieran said, reaching into his saddlebag, "I have something for you." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Kate opened it carefully to reveal a leather-bound journal, its cover tooled with an intricate design of wildflowers. "Open it," he urged. Inside, on the first page, he had written in his careful hand, "For Kate, who arrived with a fever and stayed to heal my heart. All my love, Kieran." Tears filled her eyes as she traced the words with her fingertip. "It's beautiful. I thought you might write our story in it," he explained. "For the children, so they'll know where they came from." Kate reached up to touch his face, her hand as gentle now as it had been that first night in the storm-lashed barn. Our story isn't over yet, Kieran Young. No, he agreed, leaning down to kiss her in the same spot where he had once lifted her, fever-stricken and unconscious, from the wreckage of her old life. We're just getting to the good part. They rode home together as the sun climbed higher, back to the ranch they had built, to the children who awaited them, to the life they had forged from an unexpected beginning. And if anyone had asked Kieran Young the secret to his obvious happiness, he would have simply smiled and said he'd been blessed twice over, first with the courage to stop for an overturned stagecoach, and then with the extraordinary good fortune that the woman he found there had chosen to stay and make his house a home.